So this book is The History of Philosophy by A.C. Grayling, who's been one of my favorites for quite a few years. He also has great hair, by the way. I'm never going to have that kind of hair, but I thought I would read a little bit of it and comment on it, because if you're going to buy a book on philosophy today, if you're just getting started, this is a pretty good book. It's a little bit on the thick side, but it covers the whole history of philosophy, all the way up to African philosophy, which is interesting, actually. Arabic, Persian philosophy, Chinese philosophy, Indian philosophy, continental philosophy. So it's one of those that covers at least the basics of the whole gamut. And this is the introduction, and he says, philosophy's history, as today's students and teachers of philosophy see it, is a retrospective construct. It is chosen from the wider stream of the history of ideas in order to provide today's philosophical concerns with their antecedents. This fact has to be noted, if only to avoid confusion about the words philosophy and philosopher themselves. For almost all of its history, philosophy had the general meaning of rational inquiry, though from the beginning of modern times in the Renaissance until the 19th century, it more particularly meant what we now call science, though a philosopher was still someone who investigated anything and everything. Thus it is that King Lear says to Edgar, "First let me talk with this philosopher. What is the cause of thunder?" On William Hazlitt's tombstone, engraved in 1830, the famous essayist is described as the first unanswered metaphysician of the age, because at that time what we now call philosophy was called metaphysics, to distinguish it from what we now call science. This distinction, because that was about when science was invented as a modern field of inquiry, so to speak. Scientia, by the way, has always meant from the Latin knowledge. So that distinguishes it from what we now call science. This distinction was often marked by the labels moral philosophy, to mean what we now call philosophy, and natural philosophy, to mean what we now call science. The word scientist was coined as recently as 1833, giving the related word science the sense it now familiarly has. So that's the kind of thing that he'll mention. You could find other examples of a general description of philosophy all over the place. Wikipedia is excellent, but A.C. Grayling gives you these little tidbits, which I like how they add to the whole thing. So he does then break up philosophy. If we're going to study philosophy, we have to look over the fields of philosophy, and so he gives you a brief summary of them. For example, one area is epistemology, or theory of knowledge. Another is logic, the science of valid and sound reasoning. Ethics is another. As a subject in the philosophy curriculum is inquiry into the concepts and theories of what is good, of right and wrong, of moral choice and action, etc. Then aesthetics, theory of beauty. He describes it as inquiry into art and beauty. What is art? Is beauty an objective property of things, etc.? Philosophy of mind is added. Now, that's not always given. The first group, epistemology, metaphysics, I don't know if I read that one. That's inquiry into nature of reality and existence. So epistemology, metaphysics, logic, and ethics, those are normal to be included in philosophy. Aesthetics is kind of an extra one that often is. But then philosophy of mind, yes, that's a new branch. That's he describes it as the inquiry into the nature of mental phenomena and consciousness. And that's relatively new. Philosophy of language, well, that was really big when I was in college. I took several courses that were titled Philosophy of Language. And yes, so that's certainly another area of philosophy today. Political philosophy, very important. And the history of philosophy itself. He says, as it is viewed backwards through the lens of the above inquiries, is an essential part of philosophy itself, because all these inquiries have evolved over time as, so to speak, a great conversation among thinkers living in different centuries and different circumstances, but nevertheless absorbed in the same fundamental questions, and therefore knowing the case law of these debates is crucial to understanding them. The way he points out that everything in philosophy and the history of philosophy is up for debate. The claim that the whole philosophical tradition is one long conversation would be contested by those who think that we cannot understand the thought of a philosopher of the past without putting him firmly in the context of his times. This is true, but it does not preclude seeing the continuity of his ideas and concerns with our own. Our own very often arose either from them or from the same things that prompted them, etc. So that gives you an idea of at least how he starts this book. And you could do a lot worse in looking for a good introduction to philosophy.